Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Hey, Cap, let's discuss the typical responsibilities at each level of an enterprise sales force, up to and including the chief revenue officer. We get asked this a lot. But I think it's important to start that conversation not at the manager level, but let's start it with, what is the sales rep responsible for? And then we can start climbing up the ladder.
Yeah.
You want to take a shot at what the rep is responsible for?
Yeah. So in this one, let's just use an example of like a direct sales rep, and we'll talk in general. If there's some nuances around that, we can discuss that. So we're basically talking about an individual contributor. Typical key responsibilities: prospecting, qualifying, closing deals, building and maintaining customer relationships, meeting and exceeding individual sales quotas, collaborating with other cross-functional team members like marketing and product, et cetera. Critically important to keep the CRM system up to date with the information. And for me, Johnny, just the kind of general, the company puts together all these tools and all these, knowledge and skills that we're going to talk about. And it's that individual contributor, it's their responsibility to take that value proposition into the marketplace and get into what I call a 3-foot conversation with the customer. So for our audience, it's just kind of taking all the information. You're kind of the tip of the spear at that individual contributor. The company needs to make sure that you are bringing that forth and representing that into the marketplace. That's your main responsibility.
Yeah. And making the number.
Making the number.
You got to do a lot of things to make the number, but you have to make the number.
Yep.
And I think anybody that's listening knows what we mean by the number, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know, because you had one called the knuckle number. And I don't know if that's still around in the day and age that we have. I don't know if you remember that, but you used to ask.
Yeah, I remember it. We may not have to go there.
No, we're going to go there.
You have to make your quarterly number. The knuckle number was, what number are you going to commit to on your forecast that you're not going to go below? So we called that the knuckle number.
No, the knuckle number was, I heard what you forecasted. Now, if you don't make it, which digit are you going to lose? If you don't make it, that was a knuckle.
Right, that's why it was called the knuckle number.
That's right. That's right.
starts at a knuckle. Yeah.
Let's talk about the one of the toughest ones, Johnny.
I think the toughest job in any sales force is the first line sales manager. Typically, they're brand new to management, and they have a lot of responsibilities. They're typically managing, let's say, 5. If it's an enterprise sales force, they're managing 5 to 7 sales reps, right? And they got a lot of responsibilities: recruiting, training, and developing sales reps. They need to, which isn't always done, fairly and equitably dividing territories to make sure that each rep has an opportunity to make their number. They're usually the first people to get called besides the sales rep on handling any escalations from clients, any, implementation issues or problems with the product. They have to basically know how to qualify through their sales reps, because they can't be on calls constantly with 5 to 7 sales reps. So they have to know how to qualify when they are in the deals with the sales reps. And they have to know how to qualify when sales reps come back from accounts as to what they think that deal is going to end up in the forecast. Is it going to be a deal for this quarter? It's going to be a deal for next quarter. And then at the end of the day, they have to make their number. But that job as a first line sales manager, because I think when trouble comes down, let's say people miss the number, the company misses the number. The people that catch a lot of flack are the first line sales managers. And they have a lot of responsibilities on their plate because they've never done this job before. So it's a really tough job.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the toughest job in the sales organization. When you look at, we go in and we'll do like an MOR, management operating rhythm. Show me what you're asking the reps to do. Show me what you're asking the first line sales managers to do. Show me what you're asking the second line sales managers to do. It's like, for me, all roads lead through that little narrow gap to the first line sales manager's job. And I think that companies, if they don't do a good job of looking at that kind of overall operating rhythm, you'll see a massive problem and a bottleneck in you're pushing way too much on those individuals. And it's good to every now and then just look at the operating rhythm. What do you ask them to do on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, and get the stuff out of there that's not having impact. Really.
Yeah, and where are they getting support? I mean, because they are typically new managers that just got promoted from account executive or sales rep, who is responsible for helping develop them? And, we'll talk about that when we talk about the second line manager.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Johnny. You always bring that up when you talk about like training. When they talk about training, everybody forgets about the first line sales manager. I want to go back to this territory and qualifying aspect. They bring up such a good topic here on the territory, is that it's that first line sales manager's responsibility to make sure that every individual contributor has an opportunity to provide for themselves and for the family. And so, I love talking to first line sales managers about this when I make them do like a plan to make the plan, how each one of the reps is going to make a plan. And you owe it to your team. When I show up, if I'm an individual contributor, it should be understood. I should trust my management that I have a territory that will provide great opportunity. And I got to tell you, bud, when I look into this, a lot of times there's not enough thought put into that. And people just figure out reps not making their number and they're good. Why aren't they making their number? And they start taking accounts from others. That's got to be a proactive kind of process versus a reactive process. Do you agree with that?
Well, what happens in a lot of those cases is I'm a brand new manager. I walk into the job and now I'm managing a lot of the reps that I actually worked with. And some of them might have, maybe I have, I'm an up and comer, so maybe I have 5-6 years of selling experience, but some of the people I'm managing have like 10 years selling experience. And now I'm adding another sales rep into the territory. So I had 5 and now I have 6. And I'm a little afraid to take accounts away from, the heavy hitter in the region or the district, whatever you want to call it. So I don't. So then what happens is I wind up taking this brand new sales rep and giving them a territory that's not equally divided amongst all the other reps. And then, like to your point, they wonder why that rep failed. They failed because they didn't have the same opportunity as the other reps. And it's really, you could say it's playing favoritism, but a lot of times it's because the first line manager doesn't have the experience in talking to everybody and telling them why we have to constantly divide these territories.
It's such a good topic, Johnny. What I like to do is I go into organization, I'll take a first line manager, I'll say, hey, list me your top 20 accounts in your region or wherever, whatever you're responsible for, in your responsibility. And then I go through a little exercise called skill will, which you've seen us do. And it's a combination of skill and will and desire and attitude and, based upon, performance and ability to perform and what have you. And what I do is I say, okay, list your sellers from your stack ranking from top to bottom. So like number 1 is the best, number 7 or whatever is not the best. Okay. So, and then what I do is I list those accounts, I list those people, and I start drawing lines. Tell me who owns these accounts. Johnny, it's unbelievable. You got it on a chalkboard. You're looking at, you see somebody with like, some attitude or behavior problems, and they're on some of your top accounts. I'm like, Well, why is
Right.
that? And they're like, well, that's just kind of how the territory comes out. And so there's a lot of things that these frontline sales managers have to kind of be cognizant of. And we're just talking about kind of territory readiness and preparedness to create great opportunities. That's just one.
That's where they should get some help from the second line manager.
Yeah, I agree with that. So let's talk about that. I want to just sum this one up. Do you like this one? I always say for the first line manager, you have to accurately predict the number. Everybody has to accurately predict the number. You don't get promoted in any organization if you don't have a history of making your number. You have to attract and retain top talent. And then, I don't know if we talked about this enough, and we're going to talk about it as we continue to go. You have to coach and develop your reps. You got to help them get unstuck. So you have to be a voracious qualifier so you can help them get unstuck, not just scream at the scoreboard and tell them you don't have a champion, go and get a champion. That's screaming at the scoreboard. Got to help them get unstuck. So, all right, let's
stay on one of those points that you brought up, recruiting.
Yeah.
A lot of times what I found out is like maybe I had a manager that was making the number and they were great salespeople and they were going around with all their reps, but they couldn't recruit.
Yeah.
And it started to tell me when everybody else can recruit, let's say you have 50 first line managers and, one or two of them can't recruit. And every time they do, they're sending you a C player or a B player. And before they send you the person, they call you and try to sell you on why this is a great person that we ought to hire. And then you see the person and you realize there's no way I can hire this person. This happens a couple times to you. And then you start to realize that the outside world is telling me more about my first line manager than I know, that they don't want to work for him. He can't recruit A players. So they're looking at him or her in some way or fashion saying, I don't believe that you're going to go anywhere in this organization. So therefore, I almost have a ceiling on my growth. And number two, I don't believe that you're really going to be capable of helping me, get to the next level. So therefore, I'm not going to work for you. And there's been times when people, are really decent first line managers, but because they can't recruit, you have to take them out of the job.
Yeah, that's such a powerful thought process there. For me, if you can't attract people to the company, your value to the company is greatly diminished. And so here's another thing, like frontline sales managers, they typically don't have a history of recruiting. So when we talk about this later on down the road, you're going to share with us, I'm sure, that you have to kind of help them recruit. But a couple of just basic things, an ideal profile for a candidate is extremely important. How many times do I say, okay, they just hired somebody. I say, okay, tell me about the person. They tell me about the person. I say, how do you know that that's going to create success in your organization? And they'll be like, well, what do you mean? And I'll say, well, how do you know you've just recruited somebody that's going to be successful? And they're like, well, I got their name from somebody else on the team, or or they're really gritty, and I'm like, oh boy. Mm-hmm. And so for me, Johnny, the big ones are like major competencies that I'm looking for, like territory development or building champions, or there's some major competencies. And then I have to make sure that I understand what do those key behaviors look like that are measurable. And I got to be able to ask for that in the interview. And these are things that frontline sales managers have to be able to do. And the other thing they've got to be able to do is they've got to be able to source. I find, Johnny, the number one problem, and I know I'm jumping ahead, we'll talk about this with the Teflon manager, is most people struggle with sourcing and qualifying a candidate. Sourcing a candidate is very, very hard because not in play players don't have their resume on the street. So those A players are like looking for jobs, and those are the people you want.
They're hard to find.
They're hard to find, and most people don't know how to do it. So we're kind of building up here to this Teflon manager.
Yeah, let's stay on the first line sales manager for a minute.
Yeah.
So sometimes I found that organizations are really quick to say this sales rep or that sales rep isn't making it, so let's shoot them or get them out of the organization. When you really need to also, if you're going to do that, you need to take a hard look at who hired them and who was responsible for training and developing them. And that's your first line manager and your second line manager. So I can remember joining a company one time, and it was early stages, and maybe we had 15 sales reps, maybe less. And the CEO and the chairman of the board told me that I had to fire 2 sales reps.
Yeah.
And I, obviously asked them, well, why didn't you guys fire them? Why'd you wait till I showed up?
Yeah.
If you're so adamant about it. So what happened is I went in and told them that I'm not gonna fire the guys till I find out more about the people. So I went and pulled their resumes from HR, looked at their resumes. I called them up, interviewed them essentially, and then I also had everybody take this Profiles XT assessment, which talks about characteristics and everything. Yeah. So between their resume, between the interview and the results on their characteristics, I thought I would hire these guys again if they showed up in a different body with a different name, right? So I'd hire the same profile. So then I started to realize when I did more investigation, we had a problem with the first line manager. So I went and talked to him, did the same thing, and then decided that I had to get rid of the first line manager. I got rid of the first line manager. Both of these reps the next year made President's Club, and one of them's a CRO and one's a VP of sales for like North America. Now, I would have changed their lives, changed their careers if I didn't take the time to understand where is the problem. Is the problem truly with the sales reps, or is the problem with the sales management?
Yeah.
And my main point is too many organizations are too quick to pull the trigger and just shoot the sales rep when maybe that's not the issue.
Yeah, I like that. I always say that if you bring somebody into the company, it's your responsibility to make them successful. So it's very easy to say, well, the rep's not making them, we're making it, we're going to get rid of them. And I always had hey, they're here. So how did they get here? And what are we going to do about it? Because I used to make people think about zipping people up if you're a good recruiter and you meet spouses and you meet, friends and that kind of stuff of these people, you got to zip that person up in a body bag and toe tag them and bring them back to these environments that you said you were going to change their lives. And yeah, you changed their lives. You're bringing them back in a black bag. So I took that very, very seriously. And what I found is that, like you said, people are so quick to make it the fault of the seller, but yet there's 3 or 4 people involved in the process that said that person, that person was good enough to come here. What it really came down to me, Johnny, was I always used to say, based on what? So they'd say, the rep isn't doing X, Y, Z. And I'd say, based on what? And if what didn't show up in a success profile for me, then how are they? So it needs to be obvious to me of why somebody is making it or isn't making it. And I always found that really good success profiles are, tell the truth. It's how you recruit people. It's how you source people. It's how you coach and develop people. It's how you promote people. It should be no surprises. It's also how you dismiss people. Is based upon that success profile. So without that, this conversation is a wild, wild west.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Yeah.
All right. Now, let's talk about some of the reasons why it becomes a wild, wild west because of this next individual. And I know it's one of your favorite positions. I remember you used to call it the Teflon manager. And it's the
second line manager is the Teflon manager. I'll tell you why. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me why. Tell me why you call it the Teflon manager.
Well, because let's say let's say it's a smaller organization or even a bigger organization. You're the CRO. You have a VP of North America. You have some second line managers, and then you have the first line managers. When the heat comes down, when something bad happened, like you missed a number or, people are starting to investigate what happened and why. They're usually going to the third line manager, they're going to the first line manager, and they're going to the sales reps. But that Teflon manager, that second line guy, he just he's in between, and he never really feels the heat for what happened. He doesn't feel the heat for what they were really responsible for, because a lot of organizations don't outline specifically what is the responsibility of the first line manager, the second line manager, and third line manager. And what happens is the second line manager gets promoted from the first line, and they've never done that job before. So what they do is they ask the rep the same questions that the first line manager is asking them.
Yeah.
How's the forecast? How'd you do on that deal? And the poor sales rep is like thinking, why do I have to answer these questions for the first line sales manager and for the second line sales manager? They're just asking the same questions. What's wrong with these people? Why isn't there a clear line of demarcation between their responsibilities and what questions that they ask me? Right. So that's why I call them the Teflon managers.
Yeah.
I think what you need to do in most organizations is you need to give them responsibilities which really help provide support to the first line manager.
Yeah. And I think, that's the number one thing, right? You're overseeing the performance of, 3 to 4 different sales teams across multiple territories. And your job is to help the first line managers and people under them get unstuck. But at the end of the day, you're the one that's developing that first line sales manager. You're helping each regional manager develop account strategies. So now you definitely have to have, great account insights. These people, John, I think have to be great at helping people get higher inside of organizations. If you don't have the ability, you got a rep, you got a first line manager, and you're the second line manager, and you don't have the ability to take people to places inside accounts that they can't get to on their own, that's always suspect for me. So if you're not doing it, if you don't have executive presence and you don't have the ability to help people get unstuck and help them move up in organizations, you're basically more of a first line manager than you are a second line manager. And then for sure, the forecasting and the amount of information that you need to have. And Johnny, this is one of the things that I want to talk to you about is this at these different levels. I remember you telling me a story about calling up a manager and asking them about a forecast and asking them about account. And they said, let me get back to you. And then tell us that story a little bit, because I think it's really appropriate here on demarcation of what you expect.
Yeah. So this happened a couple times, but you call up the second line manager on a major account that they have forecasted, and it's a major deal. It's like the biggest deal in their forecast. So you call them up and say, how you doing at, Morgan Stanley? Well, I haven't talked to Marty today, so let me get back to you. So then they talk to Marty. Marty tells them what's going on, and then they call me back and tell me what's going on. Then I call them again like a week later. Hey, how's it going at Morgan Stanley? They do the same thing. They got to talk to Marty first. So when it happens a third time, I just take the phone and I go, if you got to talk to Marty, what do I need you for? And I just hang the phone up. And it basically really drives home the point that you're not really doing your job. You have your biggest deal on your forecast that you're forecasting to me, and you don't know everything that's going on in that account. So what responsibilities are you taking? You're just pushing them all down to the first line manager and to the second and to the sales rep, and you're not having any accountability. That's a problem for me.
Me too, buddy. I think we've all had that feeling of not being on a call or getting asked by somebody above you about an opportunity, and you feel a little naked. Like that should only happen to you once. Somebody asks you about an account,
right?
And you don't have the information. Everybody in this audience, you know what I'm talking about. If you're an individual contributor, you don't have the information, you know what that feels like. If you're a first line, second line manager, and somebody calls you about an account and you don't have that, it's a pit in your stomach. But what I found is you got to go to the next level on this, John. And you can't like 100K, million, because everybody has different deal sizes. But I think there needs to be some demarcation in an organization. And this is the way I used to do it, is I say, hey, I expect my first line managers to have expert knowledge on this account at XYZ level. My second line managers, I expect you to have this. And depending on how high up you are, my, VPs or what have you, my CROs, there should be a demarcation. There should be somebody owns the information. If everybody got hit on a bus and there's only one person left, who would that person be that has the information that we need, especially from a forecast perspective? So I don't find, a lot of times we'll go on these conference calls, and you're right, it's hard for me to understand who's doing what and who owns
No, but it's okay. I mean,
transport.
in the case that I just showed you, is like the manager had it as their biggest deal for the quarter.
Yeah, but they had no information.
But they have no information. They're not involved in the deal. They're not. That means that they're not calling on Morgan Stanley. They're just listening to the sales rep and putting the entire burden of the deal on the sales rep. And that's not why you have sales. That's not why you have sales
the news.
management.
You used to say, I need journalists, man. I need journalists. I don't need weathermen.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And forecasting, as part of this thing, whether you're a first line manager or second line manager, forecasting tells me everything about how intimate you are with your sales teams and your accounts. If you can forecast really accurate, that tells me you're involved with your sales reps and sales teams as far as what accounts they're in, what they're doing in those accounts, what the capabilities of the sales reps are. Are they capable of doing these types of deals, or do they need some support to get these deals done? When you're constantly forecasting bad, that tells me that you're just not intimate, with the deals and with your sales reps. So that manager that I was just talking about was not intimate with the deals and with their sales reps. That's a red flag to me.
Yeah. Where else I go with that, Johnny, is I can immediately tell if I'm getting discrepancies or I don't have the information. I can immediately tell that a company hasn't done a great job of committing these critical expectations into an engagement model. And I call an engagement model basically is the sales process mapped to a customer's buying process. By stage, who's doing what when? And I like to get that definitive. Who's doing what when inside these accounts, including the customer? So what are we doing to exit, to go into stages, to exit stages? You'll hear Brian McCarthy did an awesome, from Rubric, did an awesome podcast with us where he talked about winning the stages. And I can always tell when organizations have that committed down to that level of who's doing what when, you get really, really good answers on the forecast from the right people doing the right things. But if you don't get down to that level, again, it's the Wild Wild West.
Yeah. Now let's talk about some of the things that the second line manager should help the first line sales manager with, I think. One is coaching them on recruiting.
Yeah.
How do you really assess whether or not, and what questions do you ask in the interview process to make sure that this is an ideal candidate for the company or for the position inside the company? Is it a major account position? Is it a channel position? Is it a sales territory position? Then one of the biggest ones is how to analyze each individual on the sales team for, as you call it, like skill, will, but basically, and also mainly as they go through the sales process, there's different stages of a sales process and there's different steps within each stage of the sales process. Where are the sales reps getting stuck, and what skill and knowledge do they need to be able to execute that so they can flawlessly get through that part of the sales process. That's really difficult for a first line sales manager to do, to truly assess, where is this person strong? Where are they weak? And what do I need to train them on? And I think as a second line manager, that's besides recruiting, you have to help them analyze, the individuals on the team and help plan for their development. You can't then just walk away because I'm a first line sales manager. I've never done this before. So then how do I help Joe or Sam or Sally? How do I help them, with gaining that knowledge and obtaining that skill? That's really difficult for me as a first line sales manager. And you as a second or third line manager should be able to help me with that. And one of the ways to hold these people accountable as the second line manager is when you are in a QBR and you're talking about different sales reps or account executives, it should be the second line manager that's involved in that conversation and talking about what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and what their development plan is, along with the first line manager. But I want to hear a lot out of the second line manager. That tells me, again, that they're intimate with the first line manager, their capabilities, and all the reps that are underneath them.
I agree. And
those are two really, really big things for me, recruiting and coaching and developing, that the first line manager needs help with.
Yeah. And again, if it's not operationalized in some type of success profile, in some type of engagement plan, everybody's just using all different kinds of language. Joe isn't successful because of X. Susie isn't successful because of Y. How do I even know that X and Y lead to success inside an organization? So, we're not trying to overcomplicate this thing, but let's think about it. We talked about, accurately predicting a number. We talked about attracting and retaining top talent. And attracting and retaining top talent has to be based on some type of success profile with behaviors and competencies. So everybody's using the same language. Everybody's using the same language on the forecast. Everybody's using the same language on performance and qualification. And without that, these conversations are just it's like you're before the Tower of Babel, brother. There's I have no idea what people are saying. Why?
And I've been involved in those conversations, even after I stopped being a CRO and I was, board member and advisor for a number of companies. I'd be brought in when I had a heavy attrition, try to help them figure out what's going on. And when you get even all the way up to the vice president of sales, the people that own that department, but, they're not the CRO yet. And you say, well, okay, let's talk about why Joe left the company. He doesn't have grit. Grit?
Yeah.
Great. Describe for me what grit is. I want a full explanation of what grit is, because grit could mean different things to different people. And what do you mean by grit? And a lot of times they can't even explain whether it's grit or another word that they use. They can't effectively communicate what grit really means. And how does grit fit into your ideal candidate profile? And as you talk about your success criteria, how does that fit? So tell me exactly where they fell down. Was it on skills? Was it on knowledge? Was it on their will? You can't just start throwing out these words when you don't really know why you lost a sales rep. Because if you lose a sales rep, you need to go look in the mirror, especially if you recruited them, and say, I either recruited the right sales rep and I couldn't train and develop and lead them, or I recruited the wrong sales rep and they failed. But you own it. It's your responsibility. You can't just throw it out and say, yeah, we just lost another sales rep. It was grit. And you don't really understand why, because you're going to make the same mistake again and again and again.
I remember years ago when you and I were working together, I was so proud at an awards dinner, to introduce you to, I'm not going to say the person's name. I love this person dearly. They were the number one sales rep in the company, and they worked for me. And I brought them up to you, and they were relatively new to the company in their first or second year, which is rare. So that is a great account. You could ask all kinds of questions. What's a new person doing on a big account? Blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm sure it was pretty obvious to you that, Kaplan probably was being a super sales guy or what have you, which is an absolute kiss of death for a frontline manager. This is a true story. So I brought them up, and you were so gracious. You said, hey, congratulations, wonderful to that individual. And then about a year later, the rep left the company. So how could a number one rep leave the company? And it was so amazing. You didn't embarrass me in public, but you called me and you said, hey, what happened to XYZ rep? And you gave me an opportunity to discover that this person left the company because and I got promoted. So somebody under me got promoted, and they're managing that person now. And what they really realized was that rep didn't really have a great understanding of what we did, how we did it. They were unbelievable at the details. And I just asked them for help in the administrative part on the deal. It was a really great learning experience for me because you didn't want to hear about the rep. You wanted to hear about my reflection on my interaction with the rep. And at the end of the day, the reason why that rep failed or the reason why they left is because they got to a point where they were feeling like they were going to be exposed as being the number one rep, but really not having learned a lot to be, on their own. And it's one of the greatest learning experiences I had as transitioning from a first level manager to a second level manager. When my first level manager came back to me and said, hey, and it was Tim Cavins that came back to me. Timmy Cavins came back to me and said, dude, what the hell is up with XYZ rep? Like, he's struggling. He doesn't even know how to do the demos. He doesn't. And buddy, I felt so exposed. It was one of the greatest learning lessons that I had. That rep did not progress in the company because I basically, and I'm not trying to bring light to myself, this is critical to myself. I was so panicked on those big deals that I made sure I did them. I made sure that they got done. And in the end, there was no learning going on for the rep. There was rewards, but there's no learning. And it was a great freaking learning experience for me. So what you're saying is, and you've always said this, you got to go, when you lose somebody, you got to go look in the mirror and you got to go say, what part do I own in this? Very few people do that. Everybody, especially if you recruited them, leaving like they're a pariah. Like, wait a second, how'd they become a pariah when all four of us said yes to that individual to come to this company? Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about.
And you see like organizations and they say we lost, 15 reps this quarter, and it's none of it's regrettable. And then you're like, what? How can that be? You guys just recruited these guys 9 months ago. What do you mean none of it's regrettable? You should have regret yourself because you recruited them. And you need to understand why you lost them.
So let's do
let's talk about what's that?
Well, let's do a little math here just on this, because that actually drives me nuts. When people have, I really hate mob mentality. When we lose somebody and then everybody says, oh, that person was a crap bird anyways, we're not missing much, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, wait, how long did it take you? What happened before that rep? Well, we had an open territory. The person before that didn't make it. So I say, okay, how much we're trying to get 2 million out of that territory. So we haven't got 2 million out of that territory for a year. It took us 6 months to hire this rep. So that's another 6 months of 2 million. Then that rep didn't make it in the first year. So that's like a $4 or $5 million mistake for all these ones that they say there's nothing regrettable. And when you just do the math on these things, it's incredible how, for me, that's why recruiting and recruiting success are just so critical for a company.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, attrition is the number one killer to a bookings model. So anybody that, put together a productivity model or a bookings model for the next year, attrition is the number one killer, especially in enterprise sales, because if you are, let's say most people or most companies have 6-month ramp time for a sales rep. And then after that, they need to start hitting their quota. So you hire the wrong sales rep.
Yep.
And you give them the 6 months. Most companies are going to give them another 3 to 6 months. So let's say they just even gave them 3 more months. So it's 9 months in and they decide to pull the trigger like this rep isn't going to make it. It's going to take another 3 months to recruit and get another person in the seat. And another 6 months after that, minimum. These are like really minimum. Another 6 months before the next rep is productive. At the end of the day, you lost minimum 1.5 years, typically 2 years, because you either recruited the wrong rep and they failed, or you recruited the right rep and you weren't able to develop them.
Yeah.
Big problem. I mean, it really is a killer because you can't make up that time.
No.
Let's talk a little bit about why the main reasons why reps fail, Cap. I mean,
well,
what would you pick as some of the ones that, reasons why some reps fail?
I mean, there's a lot for me, but let's kind of break some of these down. So first of all, we're talking about kind of knowledge, and then we've been mixing up in a good way. We've been mixing up kind of knowledge and skills, but like in that success profile, that's what we're talking about, knowledge and skills. Well, one of the first ones is, lack of a product understanding, and reps don't have the ability to tailor their solutions to understand how the software can solve specific problems. And I call this a company failure, because if you don't have the ability to help reps understand what a product does in terms of solving a customer problem, then you are setting them up for failure. That's one of the reasons why they fail, because they'll never be outside in. There'll be features and functions, and you'll hear managers say this, well, they never really learned the product. That's a company problem, and that's a management problem. Yes, you have a responsibility as a seller to learn the product, but as a company and as a leadership team, you have a responsibility to teach them about the product as it relates to solving problems. And that's one of the number one reasons why I think reps fail.
Yeah. Or they just go in and start talking about features and functions, and they don't really understand anything about the customer's business. They don't do any homework on the customer. They really don't understand the use case and the pain points in the use case. They don't understand the persona that they're selling to, or if they're selling to the right persona, the person actually owns the use case and is measured on the performance of the use case. And because they're just talking about their own product, they're not focused at all on the customer.
Yeah, and let's, so we're talking about product, we're talking about the customer and use cases, we're talking about now, let's talk about the competition and, failing to understand the competition and differentiate and how you differentiate. Johnny, like the crux move for me, and again, this is delineation between who's doing what when. Yes, reps have to know all this stuff. Companies have to make sure that they can position this stuff. Managers have to make sure they can help coach and develop these things. But the crux move for me is like attaching what we do for a living to the biggest business issues facing a customer. When reps can't do that, they fail. Second thing is when reps can't, this is where knowledge and skills come together a little bit, where reps can't take the company differentiation and position it into the decision criteria. That's where knowledge and skills come together. That is what leaders have to coach and develop these people to do. Companies have to be able to do it. Reps have to be able to do it. But when you're not doing these things, the last thing, Johnny, is if you don't have medic, I don't care what you call it, if you don't have a voracious qualification process, those three things for me are the three number one reasons why rep fails.
Mm-hmm.
Big time.
I think another one too is the ability to articulate value at different levels of the organization. You can't, as you move up the organization and you're trying to sell a big deal, you can't speak to a lower level technical person and the value that they're going to receive the same way you would speak to a C-level person and the business value that they're going to receive. You actually have to speak almost a different language using different words to describe how your product is going to fulfill their specific needs, because those people are all measured completely different.
Yeah, you get delegated to those things you sound like is one of our favorite quotes. And here, Johnny, is where the technical, and this is what companies have to ensure that reps have the ability to do. And first line, second line managers have to be able to make sure that they're training people on how to do this, and how to help them get unstuck. But it's where the technical required capabilities meet the business outcomes. As you move up through an organization, you are bringing forward technical required capabilities and you are connecting them to business outcomes. That is a knowledge and skill and where that comes together. And companies, that's a company kind of competency. It's an individual contributor competency. It's a competency that frontline, second line managers have to be able to coach and develop. It's critical.
Yeah. It's why a lot of sales reps may find a technical champion, but they have a hard time. So they get a low level, small deal, but they have a really hard time articulating the business value at the highest levels. And that's what you need to do in order to come out of the account with a really big deal.
And you were talking about why reps fail, right? And I think that you can even see it on deals. You can just ask a question, no matter where you are in the management chain. What's the biggest business issue facing that customer? Johnny, when I do this sometimes, my managers and my reps sometimes don't even know what the customer does.
Right. It's crazy.
They're forecasting an opportunity, but when I ask them, so tell me, how does this company make money? And what are their biggest challenges in doing that? And it seems crazy, but I understand people get so locked in on their number. They get so locked in on the numbers. They get so locked in on the commitment of a forecast. And as a leader, I think that's you can kind of help them raise above the noise a little bit by asking them, what's the biggest business issue facing that customer? And then it's your job to help them get unstuck on this concept, because as a leader, if you can help them attach what you do for a living to business outcomes for a customer, you're going to help them from failing. It's absolutely critical. Now, you talked a little bit about moving up and down here. I'm going to call that also multi-threading, Johnny. When, one of the reasons why reps are failing today is that they're single-threaded. And there's very few solutions that I see out in the marketplace today, Johnny, especially with the economy. Not only are the solutions more collaborative, let's say, and do things that solve collaborative problems inside of companies, but authority and decision authority is basically expanded because of the economy. So if you're looking at opportunities and there's only one decision maker, it's single-threaded. We're single-threaded inside an account. That's another reason people fail.
Yeah. It's also why they can't build champions too, because they're not getting high and wide. They're typically speaking to the first person that spoke to them and would have a conversation with them. And in some ways, you can't fault them for that, because a lot of times they're measured by first-line sales managers that are telling them you have to get more meetings, more demos, but everything's more of an activity. So then what happens is, if I'm measured on just getting more meetings, I get more meetings, but where do I typically get those meetings? Really low in the organization. I don't really get them higher in the organization. So I got the meeting, but now I'm stuck in the low levels of the organization. I have a hard time then, after especially spending time with this customer, of moving myself up the organization and trying to find champions either high in the organization or wide in the organization.
Yeah, and even though, Johnny, look at the identity crisis that technology industry has been through over the last 10, 15 years of, enterprise versus product-led growth versus lead with the product versus talk to technical people, freemiums, premiums. Look, I think that what that has done is it's allowed us to think about ways to get in and land and expand. So we're thinking that we land from a technical perspective and then we expand by getting business implications. And I think if you don't have a mentality as a company, landing with connecting technical with business outcomes from the initial conversations, you're going to have a very, very difficult time. But I think reps can get confused a little bit. Also, all those things you just listed, Johnny, how in the world how do you tell a rep how to deal with time management?
Right. Well, that's a big one. I mean, especially, for reps, they have a lot to do. You have to constantly build pipeline. You have to follow up on meetings. You have to coordinate, after you get back from a sales call as to what's going to happen on the next sales call with a lot of different stakeholders in your organization that you're going to need at the next meeting. And many reps have a really hard time, as you might call, getting into an operating rhythm to effectively manage their time. And that they can fail just because of that. They might be very skilled and very knowledgeable at certain things, but they can fail because they're weak at time management. And, you see it a lot of times in an organization where a sales rep, beats quota one quarter, misses the next quarter, beats quota the third quarter, misses the next quarter. It's like a sine wave. And that's really what the manager is there for, to make sure that this rep is managing their time effectively, to make sure that even though they're trying to close 3 or 4 deals this quarter, they're still building their pipeline for next quarter. And many times, as you know, that's not the case.
This is a huge issue why not only reps fail, but why companies fail, because they can't accurately predict a number. Johnny, you remember one of our favorites. I'm sure you remember Marty Carty.
Love him. Love that guy.
Yeah, Marty Carty is probably one of the best teaching leaders, coaches, and developers of talent that I've ever seen. And I remember being in a airport lounge with him one day and talking about this challenge of time management and really struggling with kind of helping my reps come up with an operating rhythm. And Marty's like freakishly smart too. So like he said to me in the lounge, he's like, well, John, it's simple. Time allocation. It's 422, 242, 224. And I was like, wait, what? So he had to get out a piece of paper and he's like, okay, in month 1, and I want you to play this over if you're listening to this, because I really like it. And there'll be arguments about, is this for an enterprise rep or for just listen in general? There has to be some type of a rhythm like this. But he said in month 1, 422, 4 hours per day researching and prospecting to build pipeline for the next 2 quarters. You're paying yourself forward. You're paying it forward. 2 hours per day qualifying the current quarter forecast, deals with technical deep dives, POBs, all the stuff that we would do. 2 hours per day building the territory by meeting strategic partners, documenting customer case studies, etc. He had a very, very specific, and he'd go to his reps and say, in month 1, it's 422. In month 2, it was 242. 2 hours per day researching and prospecting. 4 hours per day qualifying the current quarter forecast. You see, as that's building, as we're getting towards qualifying a number. 2 hours per day building the territory. Month 3 was 224. 2 hours per day researching and prospecting to build pipeline. 2 hours per day for qualifying, and 4 hours per day building the territory. So why is this powerful for me? Because I sat there and looked at it. Number 1, a new rep has to learn this. Number 2, an experienced rep like I have been before in my past. When I said I've drained the pond, that horrible feeling when you get a great commission check and then you only enjoy that for a short period of time because you know that you've drained the pond. You haven't done the things that you needed to do to build sustainable long-term productivity and long-term value for you and your company. And I think this is a huge area of opportunity for companies and for sales leaders to help people with that operating rhythm. Critical. There's no way you can have somebody telling you, I have a pipeline problem. With today's day and age, with the tools that we have, you've just got to get those activities in. You got to build it with activities, purposeful activities. Marty Carty, big shout out to him. Love that guy.
Yeah. Let's talk about the VP of sales, like VP North America, VP of EMEA, what their responsibilities are. So I think Yeah, you want to do this one?
Yeah, I think well, let's lead in quickly into the CRO because
Right.
the focus for me is, you're overseeing a broader sales operations, developing strategy and driving growth, developing and executing sales territories, managing multiple area directors, managing nuances of different regions and that kind of thing, implementing new sales methodologies, technologies, and processes. And, some companies have like you might actually have it might be a P&L, you might have profit and loss for that. But this one kind of blends into me with the CRO. So let's spend some time talking about that. Next level up here is really, there's got to be some good delineation. What is the difference, Johnny, between first, second, third, VP level that we're talking about, and now the CRO? What is the difference?
Well, there's lots of people know that wanted that job, and then they got it. All of a sudden, they found out, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought. And so you're responsible for driving, overall company bookings, whether that's subscription or driving revenue, especially if that's consumption, and then being an integral part of the executive team. So you have to play an integral role of being a partner to the CEO, marketing, product, customer success, and development. Where I've seen some people fail when they're first-time CROs is when they think that it's all about sales and they're not an effective part of the executive team. The other times when I've seen them fail is when they think that they don't have as big a voice as the CEO. And what I try to coach them on is, the CEO expects you to tell them exactly how you see the business and what you see are issues in the business, because that should open up a conversation for both of you to have. Now, at the end of the day, maybe the CEO disagrees with you and they are the CEO and they get to make the decision, but that person needs to get your advice and opinions on what's really going on in the business. And for you not to give really good feedback to the CEO as to what you think is going on in the business is creating problems for you, your sales organization, and the CEO. Yeah. But, if I keep going, the CROs really starts recruiting is a big part of the CRO job. They know where the open leadership positions are, and they're trying to fill those positions. A lot of times you might need to go into a new territory, a new country. And it's your responsibility to find that person. And that has to be super high priority. I know that sometimes when I've gone into like China or Taiwan or something like that, I might spend almost a week just going after the person that I want to get. Because if I get a really great country manager, everything else will take care of it. It should take care of itself. The CRO is also responsible for, implementing any new changes to sales methodologies or processes or implementing new technologies that could make their salespeople more productive. Because at the end of the day, after bookings, the CRO is going to be measured on the average sales productivity of their sales force. When that average sales productivity goes up quarter to quarter, typically almost everything on the financial statement looks good. When sales productivity drops, that usually means that bookings dropped. Everything on the financial statement is probably going to look pretty bad that quarter. And it's going to be a really shitty board meeting. So, and then they have to do a lot of analyzation. Typically, they have a sales ops person that helps them out with giving them all the data of what's happened, what's currently happening in the sales force, what happened in the beginning or at the end of the quarter, and trying to analyze what's really going right, what's really going wrong, what regions are doing well, why are they doing well, what regions are doing bad, why are they doing bad, and going and talking to those regional managers or area directors and trying to understand, hey, why are you and your team so productive? What is it that you're doing that I could bring to the rest of the sales force? And same on the other side where they're not doing well. What are they doing that they need to do differently in order to turn that thing around? Because it's all about sales productivity. Now, they also are judged on headcount. I had to hire, 20 reps and 3 regional managers and 2 area directors and a VP this quarter. How did I do versus the plan? Did I meet those headcount goals? And if I didn't meet those headcount goals, that could be a problem for our growth because each sales rep is supposed to bring in, let's say, $1 million each year. And every time I'm 1 or 2 months behind from hiring those people, I'm putting risk into the plan, right? Because it all aggregates up. Right? If you have 50 regions and each region, let's say productivity is 1.2 million, and that means it's $100,000 a month. And each regional manager, and you have 50 of them, all recruited 1 month late. Guess who feels that pain? Not the first line manager, not the second line manager, not the third line manager. The CRO feels it because it's now 50 times 100,000. Now, where am I going to make up $5 million as a CRO? How do I do that? Because you recruited late, right? So recruiting becomes a huge topic for the CRO to make sure that you're recruiting on time with high quality sales reps for all the reasons that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And then finally, thinking about long-term growth strategies, what do I need to take a look at to make sure that we are still headed in the right direction as far as any market trends that are happening? What's the competition doing? And then, what are my goals? And, in the growth companies that I've been in, Cap, sometimes it felt like we were a different company every year. And I also remember going into a CEO and going, we're a different company this quarter. Things have changed for us. Maybe we introduced new capabilities. Maybe the competition changed. Maybe the market's changing. Maybe we have to move up a level to call on our customer and get to the right persona. But things have changed for our company and we have to respond to that. And that's the job of the CRO, to be in touch with that, intimately in touch with that.
Yeah, I'm going to just summarize a couple of things that you said for me. Number one, CRO has to own the number, period. At the end of the day, there's one person. Now, they don't just call the ball by themselves. They have to have analytics. They have to have understanding. They have to have understanding of the market. They have to have understanding of trends inside of their organization, understanding of trends inside of industries that they call on. So first and foremost, they have to own the number, and they have to have a history of performing over long periods of time of accurately predicting that number. I'm not hiring any CRO that hasn't had real good success with doing that over time, because I think that's not something you can learn on the job. The next thing, I want to summarize all those things you said, Johnny, and every time that I said, hey, that's the company's responsibility to make sure that we're positioning reps with the right value, and that is the responsibility. The CRO has the responsibility, and I call it bringing the entire organization to put sales as the tip of the spear. So there's a lot of wood behind the arrow. There's a lot of wood in the arrow, and all of that alignment to make sure that that's aligned behind that tip, what I call the 3-foot conversation between the company and customers. CROs have to have the ability to navigate that, to influence that, to be able to go and pull product people together, CEOs together, to make sure, because at the end of the day, if you're not doing that, nobody else in the company is. And if that's not aligned, you're going to see failures all the way down the line.
Yeah.
So I love that. Hey, you talked about some measurements here, Johnny. Let's just wind this thing up, because we've been talking about a lot of responsibilities. Talk to me a little bit about some suggestions on critical metrics at each one of the levels we've talked about.
Yeah, like we said, sales metrics, it's going to be almost for all these sales managers, all the way up to the CRO, it's going to be, what was your sales productivity? Did you meet the bookings number for the quarter or the revenue for the quarter? And then underneath quarterly bookings, I'd say that it's things like, number of new logos, new logo ASP, number of deals from existing customers, existing ASP. And then if you're a subscription company, a big one is customer churn metrics. What's the gross, customer churn? What's the gross customer retention, let's say? And then what's the net dollar retention? That's a big metric that all subscription companies are measured by. And then people metrics, like we talked about, it's recruiting and attrition, it's headcount. Yep. And that's going to go all the way up to, from the first line manager all the way up to the CEO or CRO.
Yeah. Talk to me about is there any other specific metrics from, you mentioned a lot of them. Can you just summarize the ones for the CRO?
It's going to be the same thing. It's going to be like what's your quarterly bookings, what's your sales productivity, and then underneath quarterly bookings, number of new logos again, new logo ASP, number of deals from existing ASP, all the customer churn metrics we talked about, like net dollar retention, gross customer churn.
So these are just different lenses, Johnny. So all of these quarterly bookings, sales productivity, and people metrics, I've got a lens as a first line manager. I've got a lens then to own that. I have to have the optics on it for second line. I have to have the optics on it for third line or what have you. And CRO has to have the optics on it for the entire sales organization.
Right. And that's typically where you see those metrics, and you'll see them in a board meeting. But what happens a lot of times is many CROs don't go down and measure those same metrics on each region in each area and understand, that I have, let's make it really simple. I have 10 regions, and the average productivity across my entire sales force is, let's say, $1 million a year. Now, what I should do as a CRO is I should see what is the average sales productivity for each of these 10 regions. And now let's say this quarter, I only get 3 headcount. Well, am I going to give it to if on average it's $1 million in the sales force, am I going to give heads to regions that are doing 800 or 900,000? No, I'm going to give it to the regions that are doing 1.1 or 1.2 consistently. Now I do have to watch, how many new heads I'm giving to that regional manager. Are they experienced managers? Can they take this type of new headcount and develop these reps? But that's where I'm going to do it. I'm going to manage it like a bond ladder, like an investment portfolio. If the market's giving me 7, I'm not putting money in investments that are yielding 3 and 4. I'm going to go take my money and put it into investments that are yielding 9 and 10.
Great point.
And I think that's one thing that I think a lot of CROs don't do is take those same metrics that they're measured on and pushing them all down and seeing how each region's doing. And then deciding from there who I give the heads to.
And making them relevant, because you have to make people understand. If they understand why, you and I always often talk about this. When I understand the why, the what and the how are easy. So if you're measuring me on something, and as long as I understand the why, the what and the how is simple. But a lot of people just push those metrics down because they need the information, but they don't do a good job of helping people in the organization understand why those are important and what are the ramifications, positive and negative, when it goes well and doesn't go well.
Well, when people would ask me, hey, why are you giving heads to, Joe and Sam and Sally and not me? Well, what's your average sales productivity for the last 3 quarters? 900,000. Okay, great. When you get it up over $1 million, like the average sale of the sales force, then I'll think about giving you some heads. But why would I give it to you now when you can't even get up to the average across the entire sales force? Why would I do that? So that really forces people then to like first line managers, second line managers to stop and think, okay, what am I going to do to change my productivity? Do I have to recruit differently? Do I have to train differently? Do I have to develop differently? What do I have to do different to get the sales productivity up, right? And now you as a CRO don't own all sales productivity. You've now taken it and pushed it back down to everybody else. And they're all sharing the burden of sales productivity.
I like that. And as it's going down the chain, it's, depending upon who you are, like we talked about as a lens, if I'm a third line manager, I'm working with the second line manager to get an understanding of how those metrics can help them. I'm expecting them to do the same thing with their first line managers. And that's if you're a CRO and you can get that all the way down the chain, you're going to have a great option, which tells us you have to be a great communicator as a CRO. You got to be available. You got to be seen. You got to be out there, and you got to be a great communicator.
Well, it's also the quota that you would take when you assign quotas to the different regions. You build it based upon sales productivity. So let's say the sales productivity is $1 million again. Then what I'm going to do is take a look at this regional manager, and then it flows up from there. But basically say, okay, you have 3 fully ramped sales reps. So those 3 are getting $1 million each. And now you have one that's just started. So it's going to take them 6 months to ramp. So I'm going to give you $500,000 for them. And then another one started, 3 months ago. So I'm going to give you $750,000 for that one. And you're going to have to hire another sales rep within the next 3 months. So I'm going to give you, and there's 6 months ramp time. So that's a total of 9 months, 3 months before you're supposed to hire them, and then 6 month ramp time. So I'm going to give you $250 for that rep. Okay. Now you as a first line manager are measured the same way that I'm measured. There's no difference. There's no magic to giving you quota or anything. I'm not playing favorites. I'm playing exactly the way that I'm measured. I have this many people. I'm going to hire this many people. They're going to start at this time frame. They have a certain ramp time, and I'm going to take quota for each and every one of those, depending upon how long they've been here. I'm now taking that and I'm giving it to you. So now if you don't hire that one rep, if you don't ramp those other reps that you have, and you don't hire that one rep that I told you to hire, within the 3 months. So let's say we're a calendar fiscal year. You don't hire them with a start date of April 1st. That's your problem.
Yeah.
Now, do I feel it again at 50, sales leaders all do the same thing? Sure, I feel it, but I'm making them feel it right now because I gave them the quota for it. So starting in January or February, they should be recruiting for that spot that opens April 1st.
Shared urgency.
Yeah, but it's shared urgency, but I'm measuring them the same way I'm being measured. So I feel like I'm educating them, and there's no favoritism.
So buddy, we covered a lot of ground today.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground. The main topic that we wanted to cover, we went into a lot of different areas, but basically who's doing what when inside of an organization. First line manager, second line manager, CRO delineation. It's important because your organization needs to know it. You need to know it. You have to have operating rhythms. You have to have these critical activities that we're talking about built into your engagement models. I know we've talked about a lot of things, but it's really not that complicated. Who is doing what when is very, very critical. Give me a wrap up, brother.
Thanks for a good conversation, Cap. I hope that everybody picks up some golden nuggets here. And thanks to all the audience for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.